Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. This week, we're going to jump straight into the topic of identity, right? Boy, you could wrap a whole lifetime of, you could probably make a podcast out of identity. Probably is one. But today, we're going to talk a little bit about identity, right? We're kids, we're growing up, and we're, you know, using our imaginations out in the playground, and we might be playing adventurers, or we might be playing a doctor, or or something, running around, like a superhero, or maybe maybe on Halloween, or some of these things where you're dressing up to be another character, and then you're putting on that persona, right? Having fun with that, and letting your creative, playful side come out. I guess for all ages, really, right? But when we think about identity, you can really walk your life back, right, to when you were a kid. And I remember a show that was on when I was a kid, the $6 Million Man, I guess the Bionic Man, $6 Million Man. He'd gotten an accident and he got, parts replaced. So he was stronger and faster, and he had an eye, he could see really far. And I remember had an action figure that was out of the same character when I was a kid. And Evil Knievel was another one, right? And they even had an action figure then where you'd stick the Evil Knievel on the motorcycle and you wind up the base and then release it, and then you could do jumps and do all kinds of tricks, right? So obviously, you can think of those things too as an identity. And if we think about our entertainment, right? We think about essentially all of our entertainment is essentially what? People putting on a different identity, right? They're now a lawyer in this particular show, or a police officer, or whatever it is, right? Or a business person, or whatever. And they're putting on an identity, and the whole thing is what? People putting on an identity, characters, right? To tell a story. Now, think about that. That's kind of there's some depth there. There's some, we could really get into some deep stuff here if we wanted to, but just think about identity. And then as we're growing up, kind of going back there, as we're growing up, we put on other identities. I remember once I realized that I could kick the ball in the playground pretty good. We played kickball, of course, like everybody probably does when they're little. But then soccer came around, right? And I realized, well, I could kick the ball far. And so I was a fullback, and I could just launch that thing, across the field. And but then opportunities roll forward. And I remember our goalie, a good friend of mine was our goalie for the City League, in City League. And he was gone for one of our games, and I had to play goalie. Well, now I had to take on that identity, right? And I had to figure it out pretty quick. And but that's what you do. Opportunities come, and you step into new roles, right? New positions, new roles. All right, see where this is going. But as we're developing, when we're young, we take on new roles, new professions, new skill sets. Over time, what can happen is we can become, our feet can kind of dry in the concrete of our identity, right? And for some folks, that becomes everything that they hang their life on, right? So they may go through, many years of life as within the particular role for, say, work, right? Or within the community, maybe it's political, who knows, whatever. Pick your arena, really, right? But identity is so powerful. Well, now you're recognized for your identity. What is your identity? Over time, your identity, hopefully a good one, takes on a reputation. But that can also be, true for folks who struggled as well, right? Shaking off an identity of a struggling past, right? To turn over a new leaf, where they want to turn over a new leaf, but yet society and culture says, oh no, we like you in the box that we put you in. How dare you climb out of that box, right? So, we can look at the toxicity of culture itself imprisoning people to the identity that became comfortable for their community or their groups or friend groups or families and so on, right? Oh, you are our scapegoat. How dare you try not to be our scapegoat? And we're going to do everything to continue making you our scapegoat, right? So they've voiced guilt and shame and all these things onto people, or, depending on the example. And I'm sure that, there's somebody out there who's probably seeing this going, yeah, I was a scapegoat for a while or whatever, right? You were the target, right? You were the target for everybody else's misery. And it may be a season of that. Hopefully, not a life of that. If it's been a life of that, oh my gosh, more power to your enduring efforts to climb out of that box, right? And on this program, on this YouTube channel, we're about pulling people out of their boxes, not putting people in boxes. It's fine to say, hey, I recognize that I did this for a while, or I did that for a while, or this is, maybe you're a doctor and you've committed most of your life to being a doctor. It's not to deflate the value of your healing capabilities. What it is to say, though, right, is to see this, right, from who are you? What is your soul yearning for, right? Some folks yearn to do other things. You might have a creative bent to you. Maybe you're a singer. Maybe you're a songwriter. Maybe you're an artist of any type, right? Maybe you are a carpenter, right? You like to do carpentry. It's not a profession, but it's something you like to do. A lot of times we see these as hobbies, and there are many folks out there who figure out that their hobbies now became their passion, right? That was truly more in line with their with who they were on the inside, right? There are people out there whose passions, right, are very helpful in the community, right? Going out doing community works and projects and helping, the unfortunate out there in the world, right? And so what we have to be aware of with identity is we can't fall into the trap of believing our own hype too much, right? It's one thing, I can say, well, I've helped organizations improve and do all these different things. Yes, that is something, but I have many other hobbies, interests, and talents too, right? So those things are also a quintessential part of the core of who I am. Yet your community, your culture, right? The culture that you've come up in, it could be your professional community, they don't see you in that light, right? An example, and this isn't my example, trust me, I can't sing a lick, but an engineer, and I won't say his name because I don't want to embarrass him. Not that he would be embarrassed, but I just don't want to call anybody out by name, right? It's not cool. But an engineer, a mathematician, actually, technically. Super smart guy. I mean, he could literally walk with me carrying his laptop, and he was literally helping me solve problems on the fly. It was so cool. But one time, I found out that he sang, I don't know if it was opera or if it was just sang, but it was operatic, whatever. And so we were doing a Kaizen event, and I said, "Oh, well, give us a few bars," And we weren't in a small room, but it wasn't a big room either. And he belted out some notes, man, and I'm telling you what, I was like, "That is awesome," right? It just wham, and the whole energy in the room shifted, right? And what I noticed is these other team members in this Kaizen event, and I don't know, we probably had 10 in there at the time, something like that, and they had seen him through the lens of, being basically an engineer. They'd seen him through that lens, so much so that when he belted out that tune, it was almost as if they, like he had just tore off, put on a cape and he was a superhero, or whatever. That you saw a dimension to him, and that they had never seen that dimension to him at all. One of the icebreakers I had been doing even up to that point, but afterwards it even meant more that I did it, is I would have folks during different events on a little note card, anonymously, of course, write down the three, talents or skills, could be hobbies and interests, whatever, that you have that nobody you work with knows that you have. Right? And then fold it in half and then send it forward. And then, of course, I would read through them, and I'd put mine on there too, right? You've already heard what a couple of mine are already on some of these videos, and then I would read them off, and I would see, and then we would kind of play a game to see if anybody could figure out who they belong to, right? And it was kind of an icebreaker that I would do. But it's fascinating because you get to see a different dimension to people, right? And we have to be careful that our identity doesn't get so engulfed or wrapped up in our role, right? Our title, what's on your door, what's on your desk, whatever that is, name tag, whatever it is, right? If you're driving a vehicle around and it's a professional vehicle, right? It's fine to have pride in the work that you do and do the work that you do. But we have to keep in mind, we're human beings, folks, right? We're all imperfect human beings trying to do the best we can. And if there's humility there at the core of it, guess what? Our identity should be allowed to flourish. And it's super important that we don't, and I'll bring this back to leaders and organizations. When you become too over-identified with your role, right, and your title versus you as a human being, then things become super sterile. If people aren't seeing you as a human being, it's just as bad in the converse. If you're not seeing your team, right, and their identities that are beyond the tasks of the work that they're doing, right? They may be an accountant or a department manager or whatever it is, but maybe one of them, is an equestrian, and another one is, plays hockey, and the other one, is a basketball player, and the other one is a writer and a published, author, and another one is a musician. When you start to celebrate, right, the broader identity of people and that creativity that they have, and you start to see them through that rich lens, right, that deep, rich lens of who they are, and get off that linear track of just going, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2, get off of this, very simplistic way of dealing with folks. Your engagement starts to increase. You start to take interest in who they are, right? And when you take interest in who they are, they also take interest in who you are. Of course, not the point per se, but they will. But more than anything, they will coalesce and start to engage with one another more, because they will start to take an interest in their teammates, right? They're going to look to their teammates to the left and the right, and they're going to say, oh, wow, so-and-so does this. A guy that I served in the Air Force with during my second term, I guess, he would go do karaoke, right? He would do karaoke I think it was primarily on the weekends or whatever, a single guy, But I was, I had a family and all that, never heard it, but he would go do karaoke, and I would hear from other people, it's like, oh, wow, he's quite an amazing singer and stuff. Now, I would have never thought that to meet him, because it just wouldn't have never even thought about it, right? But once you do see that dimension, once you start to see that opening up of what folks' actual identity is, because some folks will actually, on the converse, they will actually cling to their identity as a security blanket, right? This is my identity. This is where my power is, right? If your power isn't open-handed and vulnerable, and hey, I'm a humble human being, I can make mistakes, but let's do our best to try to figure out, the challenges in front of us. If it isn't that, but you're clinging tightly to this sinking ship of your identity, it's who I am. It's what people know me for, and if that cracks or if that starts to come apart, what do you do then? And this is where you see people go through a lot of struggles, right? A lot of struggles. If your identity is wrapped up in a mate or a friend, or even your friend groups, right? It could be your local civic organizations. If they're wrapped into those, and then you become excised from those for whatever reason, just disagreements and so on and so forth. If your identity is too entrenched in that, who are you? Who are you if you're not in the I won't say codependent, but if you're not in that circle, who are you when you're not in that most comfortable circle that you find yourself? If you pull yourself out, are you alone and afraid? If you're alone and afraid, what I'm saying to you is you've been relying too much on your identity, what others see in you as your identity, and you're not really living from your own identity. You're not living from your own passions, right? You haven't peeled away, the husk, kind of like corn, I guess, or whatever, to get to the fruit inside of you. You may have never given yourself the opportunity to grow and flourish and to find, an amazing purpose, something that lights you up, something that gets you excited, right? Now, we can all go through troughs in life, right? We can have highs and we can have some lows, and it's okay. Sometimes we just have to take a knee and take a nap, right? But if we can, but and do some self-care. But there are those times when you're going to ask yourself, what would really give me more satisfaction in life? What would I find burning passion for that isn't something that somebody has placed on me? Now, I'm a father and a grandfather, right? But that's not my identity. That's a slice of who I am, right? But I'm, how many grains of sand are on the beach? That's how many facets there are of you and who you could become, and who and things and purposes in your life, right? Passions in your life that you may want to pursue. And right now you may think, well, there's just 3 or 4 or 5 things that I really think are core to me. I'm here to tell you there's an infinite pool of possibility within you. And it doesn't mean you have to go out there and be I'm going to say an overachiever, but a busybody and thrust so much into your life and schedule that you're just exhausted. But I am here to say is there's more out there. And when you find some of those passions and some of those things that really reel in the purpose to your life more and then really elevate that, it doesn't become a drain of your energy. It doesn't become work, right? I'm not saying it isn't work, but I'm saying is it's not going to tax you like work that you do because you kind of have to pay the bills and do the thing, right? So be very careful about your identity, but understand there's a pool of possibility within who you are, and don't become codependent on a role or a label, right? Or on a this is who I am, and cling to it with such a degree that to let go of that, right, means you're lost. If you let go of any one thing, right, are there other things in your life that give you satisfaction, right? If you were doing your profession, but all of a sudden AI, and I'm just, God forbid, I understand that's a tough arena to get into at the end of this video, but if AI absorbed your job, ask yourself, if AI absorbed your job or your profession, what would you shift to? What is it within you that would bring you satisfaction? What ignites that fire within you, right? And so that's the question. The question is really about identity. You get to be who you want to be, right? This is your life to live. The lessons in the classroom of this life are yours to take. And your lessons and your path and your journey is yours alone. Your journey is not someone else's journey. Your journey is not your neighbor's journey. Your journey isn't my journey. My journey is not your journey. Our journeys are different, right? But there are some similarities, and some of the similarities are this. We aren't doing our identity any service, right? What you truly ignites who you are if you're doing things that you've only had to do to survive, or had thrust upon you because that's what you were good at. You were the healer, so you maybe became a doctor, right? But you did it because of the family or whatever, right? I'm not saying all doctors are that way. I'm just using this as a one-off example. But if you did, or a lawyer, and you became that because the family, you were only acceptable if you did that, but yet you love to paint, right? I'm here to tell you, you need to at least start getting into your passions in life. And when you do that, what you're going to find is more joy is going to enter into it, and you might just actually become be better at the work that you're already doing, right? You may find a new light to shed on the work and the profession that you currently have, right? And hey, if you can engage as a better leader or a better teammate, right, then you're winning. That's a win, folks. All right, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day. Remember, hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day or more to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When we do this, not only helping culture, but we're helping to grow as well for ourselves. And remember, we can't transform anything on the outside if we're not willing to transform on the inside. All right, folks, hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.